Hello, welcome back to another Canon conversation. I am here with Lorenzo Lebrija, excuse me, here. And oh my gosh, how do I describe what you do, Lorenzo? I will leave it to you to describe because you don't fit a box, which is good.
I do not fit a box. You should have seen me trying to go through the commission on ministry, not fitting the box. Yeah, no. So I'm Lorenzo Lebrija. I'm a priest in the Diocese of Los Angeles. I live in Palm Springs, as you can see by the beautiful palms painted on the wall behind me. And there's a mountain right over there and a golf course. Palm Springs, California, and I am the founding director of the TryTank Experimental Laboratory. We are an action research laboratory for church growth and innovation. And if most of your listeners or viewers right now went like, okay, I understand all those words, but not in that order, right? Church growth, church innovation, we're not known as the most innovative, but that's what we're trying to change. We actually do have immense innovation in our churches. We really have smart people. And so we try to come up with our own experiments, and we sometimes join others in experiments. And we're out there when COVID doesn't have us in here, but we're out there trying to figure out, where is the Spirit leading us, and how might church be the church of the future as we do this work? So it's really exciting.
So, you said, in time of COVID, you were out there kind of doing things right now. So, A, what are you doing a little bit in COVID? And B, what do you think we should be doing as COVID? Is this a time for experimentation, or is this a time that we circle the wagons and hunker down and hope this COVID thing blows over and then maybe peek our head out?
Yeah, it's always a good time for experimentation, but I think right now, because everything has been shaken so to the core, and let me preface this by saying, I recognize that we miss our buildings. I miss our buildings. I miss communion, and part of it is because it's what Ian Markham in his book calls is our churches are painted with the prayers of those who've come before us. It's not just because of the building. Few people are like clamoring to get back into their office building. Whereas we really are looking to go back to our buildings because of the prayers that have been said there for so many years before us. So I totally get that. But now that everything sort of is up in the air, it makes us realize what is important. What are the things that really matter? And other than those things, other than Jesus, the gospel, communion, the book of common prayer, other than those things, everything else that we do is sort of things that we've added on there that are not required, that are not needed. We have sort of proven that. So it's an opportunity to ask ourselves, is this really needed? It could be from a budgetary standpoint, like, are we spending money on the right things now that we haven't spent money on this, and do we want to go back to that? Or it's been a year. Do we just say like, well, it had a good run and we celebrate it for what it was, and we use that money for something else? Likewise, it's an opportunity for us to be like, are we being the best people we can in our neighborhoods, to ourselves, to our neighbors, to those who don't know us? Are we asking more of our neighbors? Are we giving of ourselves to our neighbors? So all of these questions should lead us, hopefully, to say, how do we do it better? How can we do it better? And that's what follows from there is experimentation, because if there was a silver bullet, then there are smart people like canons to the ordinary in the Diocese of Colorado who would have said, this is how you do it. Here's your silver bullet. Go out and do this and you'll be fine. There are no silver bullets. So what we all have to do in our own context is figure out, what is God calling us to do here now in 2021 in this neighborhood? And that's an opportunity that hopefully excites us as we try to go look beyond this pandemic and say, once we reopen, once we're back in our buildings, what can we be? And that should always be an exciting question, is like, what can we be?
Yeah, I think you're right, especially here in Colorado. I mean, 105,000 square miles, different contexts. It's always tough to say, well, this applies to everyone.
Oh, no.
It's a constant challenge we have here, and it's not unique just to this diocese. But
even when we do experiments, we always try to do them in multiple congregations so that we can see, okay, it worked in one, but was it because the priest she's a young whippersnapper who will get anything done, or is it because the congregation was ready for it? So let's try it somewhere else just to make sure. Maybe different resource congregation, one that has more people instead of fewer, or the other way around, different cities, more rural, more city. So we always try to look at and recognize that absolutely something that works in one place won't work in another. And likewise, the things that haven't worked, maybe it didn't work over here, but it might be perfect to work in another congregation.
So what are some common themes? I know there's probably a lot of things you're probably discovering in different contexts, whatever too, but if you could maybe parse out a few things that you think are important, especially during this time of rapid experimentation, people are trying new things, partly because they're being forced to, let's just be honest. But, what are some of the common themes that you see as far as if we were to define, that loose word success or to do things differently or quote unquote better? Um, yeah, what are the things you're noticing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. And by the way, success is just being faithful to a call. That's all it means. And even if you have 12 people there that are still showing up and you're holding it together for what you're doing right now, that is successful. Well done in a pandemic to still be able to do that.
Mm,
What we have seen though is we have seen some churches that numerically are showing growth. They're seeing people that weren't in their pews before, that all of a sudden their stewardship campaign this last fall had more success, had more money than the year before. And so it sort of begged the questions like, now that I have a beard, I've always had a beard, but I can go, oh, what's going on over there? We should probably be looking at that. And we started to ask some questions like, hey, what are you doing? Can we see? And we started watching their sermons and here's a couple of things that people are doing that seem to be showing some signs of like people are engaging with them because of it. One is Christian formation.
mhm,
The congregations that have sort of doubled down is like, okay, we can't meet in person,
mhm,
but this is an opportunity for growth. Trying to
mm,
find God in the midst of a pandemic when 400 and too many people have died,
mm,
then that's an opportunity for us to go deeper. When we cannot have communion, it's an opportunity for us to, what does communion really mean for us? Let's explore that question. So the congregations that have been doing that sort of formational teaching around it and be like, let's explore who we are, what really matters to us. Those are the congregations that are really showing some growth because they're engaging with people with questions that people are also showing. Something else is congregations that are doing, I use the example. So when we all went online about a year ago, right? And I did a little video that's been viewed like 25,000 times. 4 steps to going on Facebook Live this Sunday. It was like shot with me and my iPhone. And basically that's how you could get on Facebook Live. It was like, you just got the order that we're locked down and you want to be on online on Sunday. This is how you do it, the minimum, right? But some churches haven't gone way past the minimum. They sort of stayed there. It's like, that's what we're doing and that's enough. Whereas other congregations have been like, so our services are made for us to be together, hear each other, feel each other. There's something about incarnational, right? We're people of a theology of incarnation that matters to us. When we're not able to do that, when we're in a digital sphere, how might we create something for this space, called Zoom or Facebook Live? And the example that I give is, it would be the equivalent of like when the NFL started broadcasting their games. If they had just put a camera and be like, well, there you are. It's like if you were in the stadium, right? What more do you need? It's exactly, you're literally in CD5 in that section. What more do you want? Whereas the congregations that are really doing well are like, okay, do we need everything in our service right now, or could we cut some of it down? Because asking someone at home when the kids are running around and doing everything else and they're trying to, in fact, if you look at I bet you anyone, if you're watching this, go look at your engagement numbers on YouTube. That really gives you a good graph and look at it. I've seen this. I've been filling in sometimes. It's like high numbers at the beginning. It drops like to nothing. Ooh, sermon goes back up. People watch the sermon, down again to nothing. And that's pretty normal. So what one congregation in Atlanta did is they're like, why don't we just focus more on that part, the liturgy of the word? It's part of our prayer book. It's part of it is a sacrament for us. So let's do. So they're doing a 17-minute service, and they're serving. So 17 minutes, people are like, oh, I can do 17 minutes. That's not asking a lot from me. So the congregations that have spent more time creating something for this medium,
mhm.
those are the congregations that are also showing greater numerical numbers.
So what happens when we go back to more being in person? Do we continue with a 17-minute sermon or service or you
Well,
know?
you may that would be fast.
Yeah.
I wrote this in a chapter of a book that came out about what's going to happen post pandemic. There's a couple of things that are here to stay. One is digital church. digital church is here to stay. Younger people are tuning into it. We're able to reach people, particularly if you've ever wanted to reach out to the Hispanic community, the Latinos in this country. They generally work on Sunday. And so offering them the opportunity to watch it on their own schedule, that's important. So digital church is here to stay. So it behooves us to try to figure out what's the best way that we can do this. Still always inviting people to join us in person, to have the sacraments, to be in relationship with us. But for those that only have an opportunity to watch it online, how can we do that the best? That's here to stay. Two, digital giving is also here to stay, by the way, which is great because theoretically, when we do this, what it will mean is that we won't have those dips during the summer, right? Because people will be like, oh, just set it up automatically and it comes out. So for planning for budgets, we should be able to have a more steady line that goes across, maybe with a little dip here or there, but it'll still be pretty steady because digital giving will now be, you'd be surprised how many churches did not have digital giving when this started. It's amazing how in 2020 we still had so many churches that didn't even have websites. And so hopefully as we moved a whole bunch of people here, this is an opportunity to capitalize on that. The third thing that's here to stay, I would say, is that it's an opportunity for us to reach young people. The Church of England has released some numbers of they have a one national service, aside from the local churches on Sunday that do the broadcast, they have one national service that's getting between 600 and 700,000 people each Sunday. And what they have is they've now been able to see through the engagement numbers that about a third of the people who are watching it are 34 or under. That's amazing. Young people are tuning in. It could be that the existential threat of a pandemic that's about to kill us all, or it could be that they're remembering the fact that they're not anti-church. It just wasn't high on their priority. So now when church is available at a time that's more convenient for them, they're taking advantage of that. So those three things I think are here to stay. The digital church, digital giving, and young people, if we take this as an opportunity, can also be that they're here to stay.
So are young people going to think remain online, or are you think you're going to enter into community? Because I can see some things of churches saying, well, we actually like that. We can continue on as is, let the younger kids have their thing. But is that model sustainable, or
Well,
do they need to be incorporated into the community, the larger community?
Yeah, the sustainable question I think is important for various reasons. One, if you're a church of one person, it's going to be really hard for you to end up doing multiple services that are geared towards multiple audiences because they are different, right? So but maybe there's a diocesan sort of youth service that's done and it's traded around and it goes around different churches, and so each church every once in a while does the digital service for young people, and that way it's not, the burden doesn't fall on one person. But second to that, and just as important for the sustainability question, is how do we enter into relationship? Again, going to the point that we are an incarnational people, relationship is important. The reason why we miss church so much is because of those relationships. So how do we create relationships with people so that we can actually have authentic relationships? We have a couple of experiments that are going on this, trying to do it via texting. There has been great success from the National Suicide Prevention Line and texting. People can be anonymous. They can just text in and say, I have some questions. I'm thinking of hurting myself. And so we're thinking like, whoa, well, wouldn't that translate just as well for pastoral care? So if somebody's like, hey, listen, I haven't been to church in 10 years, and I just wanted to reach out to someone because I have some questions. Someone in my family got sick, and I just want to chat about it. It's like, absolutely, let's chat away. And I think that those will be some ways. Ultimately, because we are a sacramental liturgical denomination, we will want to always offer the invitation for them to come to experience what we experience in a church setting. But it might be that we do it in small house churches, that we do a little meetup at a bar once a month or once a quarter where we get together and we share communion over a table, and then we share some beers if it's young people or older people, or, there's different ways. And that's where experimentation comes in. There isn't a right way or a wrong way. It's what do people need, and it's about meeting them where they are. But I think that there's ways of looking at it. But I think your questions are very astute. It's like the sustainability question, the financial questions. Those are all things to keep in mind when doing this sort of work.
So I'm hearing, and maybe I'm wrong, there's kind of a step. I think a natural church tendency would be for us to form a committee, get into a group, think of all the wonderful ideas that this committee has as far as experimentation, and then inflict them on everyone else, type of thing too. I mean, my hunch is that you got to know your community, you got to know your context.
Oh,
And I
absolutely.
think it's the context of, not the neighborhood that we once were, not the neighborhood that we wish we were, but the neighborhood that we are right now,
Yeah.
type of thing. And so, am I wrong, and how do you get to know your neighborhood, especially maybe in the midst of a pandemic?
There are two things I think to your answer that are one must come before the other. I think you also need to get to know who you are as a congregation
Mm,
first. Before you can offer that to the world, you really have to be very clear about why you all exist. Why is it that your congregation has, at the end of the day, all of us can say that our ultimate goal is the glory of God and Jesus Christ and spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ. Yes. If that's not your answer, please stop watching this right now and call Alex and say, we have a problem. Alex, Houston, we have a problem, right? If
I'm
that's
hoping
not
to get no calls. I don't want any calls.
so I'm sure there won't be in Colorado. Everyone knows that it's all about Jesus.
Yes.
But secondary to that, how we get there is different. We've all experienced this. You sometimes go to a congregation and you're incredibly moved by the liturgy and the music and the incense, and you're like, wow, I really felt the transcendence there. Other congregations, it's all about social justice, right? And we really want to change the world, and some might be about the ecology and trying to do something about the environment. So whatever your charism is, whatever the gift, if going to the theology of gifts, whatever the gifts that your congregation has for your neighborhood, make sure you know what those are.
Wait a minute. Are you saying that we can't be everything to everybody?
I know that's hard to believe because we often assume that we can, but we can't. And more than that, I think we should double down on who we are, because
Mm,
if if you were to, so I lead this workshop called Find Your Why for congregations, Mission Possible, right? So the congregations can actually find their true essence of who they are. And I always tell them, once you find what that is, the reason why you're all here, the reason why a vestry sticks together, the reason why people in a pandemic still want to get back into because there are stories
mm,
that have put those people there and that keep them there. So we discern what those stories are. We discern what the why is. We find, it's like I say, the fingerprints of God
mhm.
all over that congregation. Every congregation has this, whether you think about it or not. Every congregation has this as to why people came there and why people stay there. But once you know your why, then you can go out and try to find people and get to know your neighborhood. And there is a, so this is going to sound awful. There's an excellent resource in a book that hasn't yet been published. So it's kind of weird. So, but keep this in mind. There will be a book that comes out later this year called How to Try, Using Design Thinking for the Church. I wrote it. That's how I know that it's coming out. It's from Church
Are you?
Publishing. Yeah, So not to plug but there are ways. If anyone in your congregations is interested in design thinking, there are ways of doing it. It's not that hard to learn design thinking, but it basically boils down. Here's the whole book in a nutshell for you. There, Church Publishing.
And then people won't buy it, Lorenzo.
Church Publishing is going to call me tomorrow and be like, Lorenzo, what have you done? It's the discover phase where you figure out who you are and who your neighborhood is. And there are ways you can look at secondary research. You can look at the research of churches that are growing. Google, how are churches growing? And you will get a gazillion responses, right? That'll lead you down these rabbit holes. You'll start to find out. Once you do that, then you do observation. Is what we're finding out real for us? Does it match the reality we live in? Once you sort of do all of this sort of discovery phase, the second part is to come up with ideas. And the difference between, most of us begin in the idea. We're like, we need to get more people in our church. Let's come up with ideas. And we don't do this discovery phase. The equivalent of this would be if you and I were like, hey, Alex, let's go west. Actually, we're already west. Let's go east. And we're like, okay, I guess we could just get in a car and go east. Or do you want to get on a train? Anywhere in particular? No, just east. The difference between that and, hey, Alex, let's go to New York. It's like, oh, okay, there's these flights at these times. You're much more specific. So if you decide that you're a social justice congregation and you want to reach out to others who are like-minded like you, by the way, those are young people who are very much into the biblical message of the prophets about income inequality and all these social justice issues. And you're like, how do we reach out to them? that's a different question. Then you're not just asking, how do we get more people in our building? How do we get more people to our church? You're asking, how do we reach these young people who are into social justice? It's a totally different question, because then you can come up with ideas about how to reach these. You might want to use Instagram. You might want to use Snapchat. You might want to
Mhm.
go and meet with groups. You might want to join a group. You might want to offer your space for groups to meet, whatever it is. But there's a ton of ideas, and there's even a whole section on how to brainstorm, write, and all that. And then the third part is, how do you try it cheaply? How do you try it in such a way that if it doesn't work, and by the way, most of the time it won't.
Mhm.
That's just the way life is. You think every business that's ever launched works? No. What you want to do is you want to do it smartly, though. Instead of so we did an experiment, and please, Alex, try not to laugh. We did an experiment called Spin Church, where the thought was like, what if we took spinning and the liturgy and we meshed them together into one thing that was Spin Church?
So just, not everybody lives in LA. So let's just take a moment of pause and just say, for those of you who don't know, can you explain spinning? I know.
Yes, spinning is a studio where people get on bicycles and go nowhere. That's now that I say it that way, no wonder it didn't work. No, but what we were looking at were all the data that showed places like SoulCycle. SoulCycle is a national brand of spinning studios where people go in there. When you walk in there, the lights are dim. It says "Find Your Soul" on the wall. It's got little candles. I was like, what's going on here? Then the person that's speaking is like, there is no yesterday, there's no tomorrow, there's only this day that's been made for you. I'm like, you throw in a Jesus in there, that's a sermon coming at me.
Yeah.
And we were like, all these people, this is so popular. So people may be finding their sense of community, their sense of spirituality through group fitness classes.
Mm.
So what if we match that with what we know does work, which is religion and the things that we bring, the gifts that we as the Episcopal Church bring? So we meshed them together. It did not work. And I could go into all the details of the numbers of how we thought it was going to work, all these things that we did. But we ended up spending a total of like $3,000 to rent the studio 8 times. We ran a whole bunch of ads. We reached 167,000 impressions of our ads. We reached a lot of people. All of the work we did, it was only $3,000. But we no longer have to wonder like, hey, what if we did a thing called Spin Church? Well, we tried it. It didn't work. And we did a whole report on it. It's on our website, but it didn't work for us. It doesn't mean it won't work for somebody else. It didn't work, but we also didn't sync the church with it.
Yeah.
We tried it with $3,000. We had set it aside. So if you want to go out and meet young people who are into social justice, maybe you do a big pizza party for them after a march, or maybe you offer them water while they're marching somewhere. You put up a tent and offer them some shade. And it's just a little bottle that says, thank you for doing the biblical work, or God's behind you. And it just has your church name. You're just planting those little seeds. The thing about evangelism, which is always has baffled people, is that they think we have to go out and like, you must come to my church or you're going to go to hell. We're Episcopalians. A, we would never do that. But B, we don't even have to do that. We plant seeds, and it's the Holy Spirit who does the work of bringing them to our church.
And I think like what I like about what you're saying too is in that kind of first and second step. I think sometimes we get it wrong because if we're not a social justice church, we say, oh, but we need to be a social justice church in order to get young people. And it's not authentic to who a church is. So then they try to do it. Young people pick up on that and be like, that's not you, you're faking it,
Exactly.
just to get me in the church.
Yes.
And so it all kind of falls apart. And then we go, oh, what happened? How do we, so yeah, I love that kind of first to second, and obviously kind of leads into, once you kind of do that, leading into the third of actually trying and doing something, I think.
And trying it cheaply.
Yeah. And we get all those steps kind of confused or whatever too, or sometimes doing backwards or whatnot.
And don't get me wrong, we get the steps wrong because I think we're excited to want to, quote unquote, save the church of God. First of all, God's church doesn't need saving, right? It's God's church and God will do God's work. But I love the excitement. If we were to turn that excitement and really know what it is that makes us who we are, there's a reason why your church has been around for 60 years in that same spot with a lot of the same people. There are stories. Something is the glue. And so once you find out what that is, and it might have to do with how just so welcoming you are. It might be that you're the sense of community that nobody else finds anywhere else, and this is where they meet friends. If like 8 people have met at your church and married, I'm gonna guess that the social aspect of your church is important to people there. There's these stories. So realizing who you are and being authentic to it. And young people, going to the point of young people, they can smell someone who's not authentic a mile away.
Hmm.
So don't try to be the social justice. If you're more about the music, then live into that. Do poetry. Learn how to do typewriter poetry and go out to a farmer's market and do poems for people that are really prayers for people. It's about just showing people that God is in more things than. And I do need to talk two quick things on this point. One is we're often afraid of failure. We
Hmm.
are. All of us are. It's a human thing. And part of the reason why we're afraid of failure is because we think that we'll look bad, or it really has to do more with ego than anything else.
Hmm.
So it's okay. Let me go ahead and just right now, I am a priest in the Church of God. I give you a dispensation to go ahead and be a fool for Jesus. Go put your ego aside and just be, we're going to try things because we think if you try it smartly, you also don't feel as bad because you will have gotten buy-in every step of the way. You will have done this in a way that we have the research. We thought it was going to be a good idea.
Hmm.
Two out of three of the experiments that we've tried, and we're at experiment number 60 now, two out of three fail.
Hmm.
And we did have research and we did it smartly and we tried to do it with very willing partners. It's just the reality of how things are. Not everything's going to work, and that's a-okay. I call it holy failure. It's part of my spiritual practice. I fail for Jesus. I wonder if I could have used that in seminary. Hey, Lorenzo, you didn't do well in this test. I failed for Jesus. No.
Yeah. I don't think it works quite well there. But I think it's also that, notion that, God loved us and has always loved us and loves us no matter what. This thing called grace that we probably need to lean into a little bit more and talk about a little bit more. But, I think if, are people feeling judged by God, by their successes or their failures, that, the more quote unquote, whatever we define it, successful we are, the more God loves us. Like, it doesn't, and I fall into that trap sometimes too. I'm
All
not
of
going
us.
to and say that, I'm immune from that. But I think we all need to be reminded, like, God doesn't work that way.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And that, I think part of it's also we don't want to fail for God. It's different when I fail for myself. Like if I go and try to do a marathon and I don't finish it, I feel bad. My friends buy me a beer and life goes on, right? But I think there's a certain sense that if we're trying something for God, we really don't want to fail. The
Mm.
moment that you said, I want to get more people to get to know God, you succeeded. That
Mhm.
was it. That was the moment that you were faithful to that call, and you're just responding to the Spirit saying, hey, I think you have a good idea. And
Mm.
if it doesn't work, that's fine. You'll discover other things. And you may be paving the way through your quote unquote failure for someone else later to be like, wait a second, Alex tried that thing, but he used red. What if we had used blue? Would
Mm.
that have made a difference? And let's try it again. And if you have the research and you tried well, then there's no need to say we won't try again. And the second thing that I want to say about failure, though, is fear.
Mm.
In the Middle Ages, when cartographers were doing maps, they would get to the point where it's like, well, we don't know what's beyond that, right? We just don't know. And they literally would write on the map, there be dragons. That's
Mhm.
what's in that land. It's like, we don't know what it is, but don't go there. It's bad. We as humans have always been afraid of the unknown. And a
Mm.
lot of this trying has to do with stepping into the unknown. And we just have to believe what God said, which is that we will never be alone, that God will always be with us. And how many stories of great triumph in the Gospels and in the biblical witness begin with God saying to someone, hey, go in that direction. I don't see anything. Just go, trust me. And we follow. And then before we know it, we've made a new covenant with God. We're living into the covenant with God. And how beautiful is that, even if we don't know where we're going?
And I think there's something Warren, I want to say Ron Heifetz, but if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Somebody could look it up later. But it's not that people fear change; it's that people fear loss. And I think that's kind of attached. Part of the risk too is like, what are we going to lose as a result of this? Like, God may be calling me something richer, something better, to live more faithfully into that. But what if I lose something along the way? And so, yeah, I think that's part to it too.
And that's
Also,
part of spiritual formation.
oh, totally. Yeah.
That's part of us growing into our deepening our own faith.
But I also wanted to circle back a little quick, and then, we probably do have to kind of wrap this up.
Sure,
Thank
sure,
you
sure.
for people that are sticking with us. I appreciate it. It probably gone longer, but this is good. So here we go. At least I think it's good. So,
I agree.
so you talked about, kind of first some of the, if you want to bring more people to God, and I just want to kind of highlight that too, because in my personal opinion, I think that's part of it too. People also smell out, the inauthenticity of like, I want to grow my church. Like I simply want to grow to my church to grow my church. I think it has to be centered in this relationship with God. God has to be a part of it. That we're calling into people a deeper relationship with God. We're not trying to perpetuate this institution, especially if it's not centered on God. So, I just want to kind of raise that up as well and say, like that's important stuff. And, hopefully you found that to be true.
Absolutely. And in everything that people do, in all the work we do, whether you're trying something or not, we should always remind ourselves that this is why we're doing it. We're doing it for Jesus Christ. We're doing it for the kingdom of God. We're doing it because we love our neighbors. We're doing it because we want to share that with them. And that has to be at the core of who we are. It will never, ever work if you are panicked and you're doing it because you're trying to save your building, because you're trying to get more people in so they can pledge. That's the wrong reason. And I hope that doesn't work, actually, to be quite honest. I hope that doesn't work, because I wouldn't want that to be a church in the Episcopal Church. I wouldn't want that to be a congregation of ours. Our congregation should be so filled with love and the Spirit that even if the building has to close, they will still meet in a parking lot. They will still meet in someone's home and be faithful to that calling from Jesus.
Preach it. Preach it.
Woo!
Well, thank you, Lorenzo. I'm sure we could go on and on and on, talk forever.
But the sun is literally starting to set.
Yes.
So. So it must set on our conversation.
Yeah,
as
it must.
well.
Well, thank you again. Thank you for all the good work you are doing for behalf of the wider church and pushing us to new experimentation. We hope that our paths will cross again, maybe sometime in Colorado, as we
indeed. And we love to. We have a couple of congregations in Colorado working on experiments with us. If anybody is interested in finding about our work, by the way, they can go to our website, which is TryTank, TryTank.org, TryTank.org. You can sign up for our monthly newsletter, which lists all of our current experiments. When we're looking for partners, we list it on there. And it also has some good resources as well. Sometimes we do webinars. Sometimes we talk about the future. So just
you're doing some great work with the Virginia, what is it, Lifelong Learning Center, right?
Lifelong Learning at Virginia. Yeah, if any congregation that's interested in doing the workshop that I'm doing on finding your why which is called Mission Possible, is February 20th. It's a 3-hour workshop, and we will get you to the first draft of your why. We're encouraging investors to come together. I think we're at 12 of 15 congregations that can participate. So just go to vtslifelong.org. That's right, vtslifelong.org, and you can sign up for it there. And then I'll see them on the 20th. Any questions that anybody has, by the way, I'm pretty open. Lorenzo@trytank.org is my email. Just drop me a line. And even if you just want a conversation partner because you want to try something new and you don't know what the first step you need to do, call me up. We'll walk you through that.
Please call this guy. Call this guy, please. Then let me know.
But remember, if it's not about Jesus, then call Alex.
Yeah. All right, Lorenzo. Thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you. God bless you too.